Hello, everyone. My name is Eli Davis, and today's presentation will be on unlocking global talent. We'll talk about how to navigate the recruiting and hiring process for international students at the University of Washington, including touching on work authorization. I am recording this in sort of mid-January, so if there's been any changes since then, feel free to review any updated documentation that we may have on our website or to refer to any government resources as well. So let me quickly review our agenda for the session. I will provide some background on our international student population, review coming types of work authorization, and explain how we as a center communicate related expectations and responsibilities with our students. Given our short time together, this will be a quick overview, but I will also be sharing additional resources that you can review for more in-depth advice on specific areas. And as a quick sidebar, none of this is intended to be treated as legal advice. Please consult with your own attorneys for any specific questions that you might have. So I did want to briefly introduce myself. My name is Eli. I use she, they pronouns, and I am the Internship Program Manager at the University of Washington's Career and Internship Center. So the CNIC is the centralized career center on campus, and we provide career guidance to students in nearly all majors and school years. My role is focused on supporting campus partners and developing great internship programs. I also oversee the administration of some specialized scholarship programs that support Huskies who are engaged in experiential learning. And I really encourage all students to take a chance and explore during their internships. And with that, let's share some information about our international student body at the University of Washington's Seattle campus. So roughly 15% of our student population is international students. And the vast majority of those are going to have an F1 visa. So while many of our students are from India and China, we have a very diverse international student population, and over 100 countries are represented on campus. As you can see, there is a greater proportion of international students in our graduate program, including the professional and certificate programs. As our center serves primarily undergraduate students and recent alumni, I won't be able to go into too much detail about those graduate programs, but just something for you to keep in mind if your organization typically hires master's level students or higher. As with our domestic students, there are going to be some differences among the student priorities depending on major, class standing, and degree types. Our undergraduate international students are more exploratory minded, so they're focused on getting an on-campus job or an internship in their field of interest. Graduate students tend to be a little bit more discerning, so they have a solid plan on what sort of industry they want to pursue their career in, and may have an idea of what employers might be a good fit for their professional goals. I also wanted to note that certain degree programs have a larger proportion of international students. So for example, in the Foster School of Business, the Master of Supply Chain Management program, their enrolled student population is over 90% international students. And this student population is highly engaged and interested in preparing for career success, both in the United States and abroad. They use our services at higher rates than expected, especially because they often have to become experts in immigration and labor policies to advocate for their needs post-graduation. So, what are the different responsibilities of students and employers for international students compared with our domestic students? As I mentioned before, the majority of our international student population is on an F1 visa, so I will only cover information related to that visa. All of the processes and deadlines that I mentioned here are also specific to our institution. If you recruit at other universities, there may be some slight differences in how that university manages work authorization for their students. And again, none of this information should be treated as legal advice. I have consulted with our campus partners and reviewed information provided both by vendors and by government agencies, but you should absolutely connect with an attorney to determine what guidelines your organization may need to follow. There's only one thing that you take away from this webinar. I hope it's this. It is entirely up to the student to request work authorization while in college and immediately after graduation. As an employer, all that you have to do is to provide our students with an offer letter so that they can complete the process with our International Student Services Department. And we do try to make that clear to students. Our advisors encourage students to reflect on their long-term goals, and if the student knows that they want to stay in the U.S. beyond 3 years, they will need sponsorship and should be upfront with that throughout their entire application process. Some students might be planning to return home once they finish up their OPT, so they won't need sponsorship at any point throughout their careers in the US. Ultimately, we let our students know that trying to hide those plans can lead to rescinded offers and ultimately waste the times of both the student and the employer. The first type of work authorization I'll cover is CPT, which is used for co-curricular experiences like internships, jobs, and practicums. As it's curricular, the experience must be related to the student's field of study, and the university is the entity that issues work authorization. Approval is tied to our academic terms, and the dates are not flexible. I also wanted to mention that our domestic students are also subject to these dates if they are registering for academic credit related to their internship. So if you are planning to recruit University of Washington students, please review your academic calendar to align your internship start and end dates, or consider building in some flexibility for the onboarding process. And while it's not listed here, our international students are also eligible to apply for summer CPT. So those dates will again be available on the university's academic calendar. In order for a student to be able to apply for CPT, they must have completed 1 year of full-time study in the US. The only exception to this is for certain graduate students who are in a program that requires them to complete an internship or other experiential learning as part of those graduation requirements. Those graduate students can apply for CPT on the first day that their program starts. CPT is pretty easy for a student to request. They need an offer letter from their employer confirming an internship, and they need to register for academic credit related to that experience. However, processing that request can take several weeks. It can be especially challenging for our students to get an internship offer with a start date only a week or two out. The student cannot start working at their site until CPT is approved, which at the University of Washington takes an average of about 3 weeks. And again, it's why I would encourage you to keep our academic terms in mind and see if you can adjust your offer dates or your start dates for students who are interested in following the CPT process. And while there are some cases where a student may use OPT before they graduate, the most common use is going to be post-completion or after graduation OPT, which is what I will cover. So like CPT, approval is tied to the student demonstrating that the experience is related to their major. Unlike CPT, OPT requires a minimum of 20 hours per week at the organization, and the authorizing body is going to be U.S. Customs and Immigration Services. So for students with an approved STEM degree, they can request an additional 24 months of work authorization if the employer is enrolled in E-Verify and the role at the organization is related to that STEM discipline. So as an example, an international student who graduated with a bachelor's in environmental studies can apply for OPT and then apply for the STEM OPT extension, thus being able to work in the US for 3 years after graduation without ever needing sponsorship. And again, applying for OPT is up to the student. UW will process their initial request the quarter before they graduate, and then US Customs and Immigration will grant them their final work authorization. OPT doesn't even require a job offer. US Customs and Immigration will grant the alumni a work authorization card, and then once the student is hired, they will report to US Customs and Immigration and begin using those 12 months of OPT. For the STEM OPT extension, all the employer has to do is be enrolled in E-Verify and then submit Form I-983 to verify that the role is related to the alumni's degree. Now, I know government forms can seem pretty intimidating, but I wanted to mention that Form I-983 is very similar to a learning agreement that many institutions have in place for students who are getting academic credit for their internships. So Form I-983 asks essentially the same questions, it's confirming that the role is related to the student major, that they have a specific set of tasks to complete during their time with the organization, and that there is some sort of measurement or assessment of performance taking place by a supervisor. So for organizations that are already familiar with learning agreements, completing Form I-983 for the STEM OPT extension eligible students should be a relatively straightforward process. And here is a quick recap of the two types of work authorization I just covered. Again, CPT is used while the student is still in school, and OPT will normally be used immediately after graduation. And with that, I want to briefly talk about sponsorship and how we communicate work authorization needs with our students. So sponsorship is a longer-term work authorization that must be initiated by the employer. This visa type has limited quantities for-profit employers and can grant an additional 6 years of work authorization for the international student. Because it's so competitive, few employers will go this route as it can be expensive and there's no guarantee that your candidate is going to be selected and move forward in the visa process. I will briefly mention that you can reapply for the lottery every year if your candidate is not selected, and that graduate students, so again, alumni with master's degree or higher, are being pulled from a smaller pool, so they have a higher chance of being selected. Because sponsorship is mostly occurring at large multinational companies, I won't go into further detail about sponsorship. Just know that it might be an option, especially as nonprofit and government organizations are not subject to those limited quantities cap, as long as the role meets certain criteria. So I've spent a lot of time talking about work authorization, but what is it? Work authorization just refers to the ability to be employed and get paid for your work in the US. US citizens and residents can complete the I-9 verification process as normal. People who are not US citizens or residents must also provide documents that verify their ability to work in the US. As a side note, work authorization is not required for positions that are volunteer or otherwise unpaid, or for positions that are based outside of the US. You as the employer have a right to know work authorization, but you are limited to 2 questions worded similarly to the ones here. And again, federal guidelines related to fair employment apply to all applicants, regardless of immigration status. So you cannot require applicants to provide any information about protected statuses. Those questions must be entirely voluntary. And I'm going to walk you through what that looks like when you're uploading an open role in Handshake, our career services platform. So one of the questions will be related to work authorization, and you have the ability to select the proper work authorization needs for that specific job. As you can see, you also have the option to not disclose work authorization, but it will give you a disclaimer about some of the implications of going that route. You can also just select CPT or just OPT. So if you're hiring for just summer internships, you might select CPT in the drop-down menu. But if you're hiring for summer internships and entry-level positions, then you could select both CPT and OPT, depending on the conversion model at your organization. And again, any paid role in the US is going to require work authorization. Our team conducts regular audits on postings and will flag your positions if they are paid, based in the US, but are not correctly identified as requiring work authorization. And on the student end, they have the ability to filter by these types of work authorization. So the top 2 options will most likely be used by international students who are graduating seniors that want to remain in the US after graduation. The CPT filter will likely be used by international students who are seeking internships, part-time jobs, or other types of experiential learning. And students who are maybe undocumented or who are seeking unpaid positions, maybe for a service learning opportunity, those students can filter by the no work authorization required. I don't imagine that we will see many students filter by unknown, especially right now. They're really aware of a tight labor market and they want to ensure that they're spending their time applying to roles that they're pretty certain they can move forward with. Ultimately, I would highly encourage you to review your existing position descriptions and determine work authorization needs. The vast majority of internships and entry-level roles can easily be opened up to international students without any expectation of sponsorship. Students also get this information at our career fairs. So we pull this information directly from Handshake, and it's available at multiple points, including the student booth map, signage inside of the career fair, and within the Handshake app for the event. As you can see on the top right, we try to make it very easy for students to identify which employers have open roles that fit their work authorization needs. We've heard from students that they really rely on this as they determine what recruiters to connect with and which booths to spend their time at, especially because so many of our students are jumping into the fairs in between classes and they only have a limited amount of time to network. And I recognize that I really flew through all of this content, but you always have a chance to reach out to us. Email us if you have any questions, and ultimately, thank you so much for attending today's webinar.